Sorry. Okay, so on government team, we have Ragunan, and on opposition, we have Wolawa. Judging with me are judging with me are four wonderful panels in order of tap. Let's welcome Amira.
Hi everyone, my name is Amira. I'm from Unpas. My pronouns are she, her, and good luck everyone.
All right. Kagabe.
Hello everyone, Gabe here, no pronoun, good luck.
Right. Kak Insani.
Hello everyone, I'm Sunny from President University. Hope this grand final runs smoothly. Best of luck to everyone.
Okay, and last but not least, Kak Rachel.
Hello everyone, my name is Rachel from Venus University, and good luck for everyone.
Okay, and I'm the chair for today. My pronouns are they, them, she, her, and I wish everyone a very good luck for this debate. Without further ado, under the motion of this house would restrict the access to Over the Rainbow exclusively to historically marginalized groups. Let's welcome the Prime Minister of the debate. Here.
Okay, guys. Hi, guys. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Audible and visible.
POI through chat box. Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think like gender pronouns as always, they them never change. I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think there is 3 characterization that really important before going to my argumentation. Firstly, what is historical marginalized group? I think they are like race minority, gender minority, queer people that might be been like oppressed from generation towards generation, and also colonized group like Indian community or other indigenous community in the very first place. Chat box. But second of all, I think that how we can trace them in the very first place. I think like it can be like we check the data or the income per race group because it comes with pattern, for example. But thirdly, it is also kind of whether or not they are accept the subsidized or not. It is something that can we trace towards the data in the very first place. But thirdly, I think that's how at the end of the day, Over the Rainbow is something that we need to characterize even more. It is like one thing that we need to highlight it, that it is an option. So if you're consented to like sending to virtual world, then it's totally to be okay. But if you're not going to consent because you believe that there is another belief like your religion or etc., you can go to afterlife that you want. But it is something that fully on control in terms of like aging, illness, your emotion, etc. So monotonistic life, it's not the debate in the current status quo because if that's monotone, you can end it up at the end of the day. Two argumentation. Firstly, why we think this is something that's justified to do in the very first place. But second of all, why this fulfill the past burden that we cannot fulfill in the current status quo. First of all, why we think this is something that justified to do in the very first place. Because we think what happened in the current status quo, it's not completely enough in order to repair them. For example, restorative justice. No matter how much we try, we cannot give the same compensation. For example, generational trauma that you get even before like you were born. So at the end of the day, it affecting you even like, people do not really understand that, or it is something that can see by the eyes in the very first place. But also structural oppression that already existing. True, it might be some like growth in terms of society, but it takes time in the very first place. But second of all the harm that already existing, for example, oppression, poor, and etc., shape them into who they are today. So even though that this is something that probably can be changed in the current status quo, but it cannot change their life because it shaped them into who they really are right now. That's why collective healing of the problem they cannot access in this real world in the very first place. I think this means that it will be like a level of compensation, but in a final stage of level compensation that this community will get in the very first place. But I think why historical oppression is something that really, really important to be addressed. And this is something that we cannot prepare right now. Even further, this is something that makes them have the different starting point rather than other people, for example. This is the reason why you cannot restore it right now because it already happened. But second of all, if you want to make it fair, you cannot fix it right now because their ancestors already like feeling these kind of things, and you cannot restore it right now because they do not exist anymore in the very first place, right? It gives you an equal access, assuming that historical oppression never existed. They can like pay for more for their education, for example, access more for good foods, and etc. This is the portrayal why at the end of the day, this is something that justifies to send them to the virtual world as a comparatively for everyone. I think why this is need to be exclusive and cannot be inclusive towards everyone, because we need to understand that we need to make them understand that we care about them right now, and this is the form of reparation to those harm. If we make into everyone, then the question is, why is there the one, like we're denying the fact that probably they are the one the oppressor and etc. If they questioning about why afterlife and etc., these people like most likely growing up your future that cannot be fulfilled the best as the best potential, and also about their ancestors. Because like if you're talking about your ancestor, for example, their incentive and also what they want is in order to at least makes their next generation living a really best life in the very first place. This is why at the end of the day, it is something that really important. But why sometimes there is something that cannot change in the current status quo, because even like African American right now have access in education, have access into nutritious food and etc. Sometimes that we cannot like expect people in order to be like perfectly accepting you. Like there is always like backhanded compliment and etc. about your success and etc. People looking at you in the weird way and etc. This is something that somehow we cannot change, and at the end of the day will grow into the community at the end of the day. Second argumentation, why this is something that fulfill the past burden that we cannot fulfill with a normal restorative justice system. This creates a world that your ancestors are not likely to live in the very first place. This is something that important, like I told you before, because the interest of the ancestor itself is not only to protect the children, but it's also to create legacy. For example, what they are fighting for in the current status quo might be like fruitful for their next generation. This is what we mean as like fulfilling what already happened in the past, because we give a restorative justice for people that already dying, for example, and also people that already cannot access the restorative justice in the current status quo by fulfilling their at least minimal interest to protect their children even more, or creates a legacy that this generation can living their best life as their expectation in the very first place. This would not like stopping the affirmation action. Why so? Because this is not the debate that affirmation action exists or not, because this action is a proof that there is a growth in the community itself. But second of all, I think this is the good moment in order to like call out more people that this is something that really urgent, that those people that already oppressed is some deserve more in the current status quo. It's proving how bad we're already done for them. So that's why this is call out of everything that we've done and order pushing us to be a better person at the end of the day. Because of that, really proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much, Prime Minister, for the fine speech. Let's welcome the leader of opposition to respond and to open the case of opposition. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. So sorry I cannot open my camera. Limited internet speed. Okay, ini sec ya. First of all, thank you so much for IWGM. It's been a very fun competition. Very amazing motions as well. Okay, I will start. Oh, POI chat. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Two things to clarify. Number one, as you notice, there is an absence of a clear system on how they are going to allocate certain people to be categorized as vulnerable. I know they define it, but it is unclear to me to whether or not that Kanye West was going to be granted the access to the program, because while that based on identity on their race, they are very vulnerable, based on their income status, they are not. So how would you prioritize this level of multiple layer of identity versus the lived experience that certain people have? Unclear. Second thing is that I believe that principle alone is not enough, as we are talking about policy, and policy is so much more than about responsibility, but also about effectiveness of that policy to be implemented. Reparation sounds good in principle, but it's not the most productive form of narrative, especially because the entire benefit that they have is only afterward when they get and enter this particular program. You cannot ensure that there is no improvement besides to just say that just wait till you die and you will feel better. I don't think that this is a good structure of a policy by the government. I'm going to assess two things. All respond will be integrated. Is that the assessment on the way that state create their decision. Second, assessment on the outcome of this particular policy when it is implemented, and if I have time for this, right? So let's go to the first one. Assess the way that the state create their decision. I think that it's not one-dimensional as what the government mentioned. I think a metric of assessment on consequences are important. Principle, but overall responsibility need to be catered not only to one group, but multiple layer of group, which are not limited to just one specific group, but assuming that government cater to the most vulnerable, like what they want to say, I believe that this program and the way that the system are established are still not ideal, because the goal of the system is to allow access to a better chance in life. And I make this interpretation based on the overall function of how the virtual life would look like, right? To be free from all constraint and harms in real life. And these are more universal benefit that surprisingly did not just affect the minority. I know that minority to some certain extent are suffering probably more often than a lot of majority, but that cannot be measured in level of whether or not that majority has never suffered at all within their life, and they're still within the responsible actor that the government still cater to. But the ranges of suffering also exist, and while it is more often suffered by marginalized community, but not all marginalized communities suffer the same, and vice versa. For example, Beyonce probably suffer less than the average white middle class worker that barely can afford healthcare, right? How are you going to prioritize these two? Are you going to give access to the middle class worker but white and did not suffer racially, or are you going to give access to Beyonce more, who are suffering based on race but not on the premise of their income? So these are a very important metric, because while that they can assume the fiat that the system can work, they need to be able to clarify to us in a way that it can be fair and proportionate to the people that they want to cater to. But the third thing is that what it meant, it essentially means that government cannot generalize suffering, though through identity alone, and need to cater on the lived experience. The reason being why does it matter? Because this prove the ranges of suffering that exist in status quo, but are also equally important for the state to think about. But also as a state, when you cannot ensure that your metric is correct and can be fair, it is safer for them to ensure that the way that they create their system need to be as accessible, as forcible, as universal as possible. Therefore, answer to why then they should not take this decision. But the second thing on this particular level, I think while we agree that the responsibility to minority to some certain extent are specific, we ask the government to whether or not that the fulfillment of this responsibility can only be achieved by restricting access what everybody else, because there is an absence on setup. Because if we imagine this as something that is virtual, that is maintained by the government, it is mostly created through technology, which can possibly mean several things. One, multiple infinite servers. This means that government can cater to more than just certain number of people that can be classified through server. Imagine if you play Genshin, for example, there is Asia server and Europe server, or any other game that you could be able to imagine on. But second, within that, the control and maintenance can be done, e.g. implementation of safeguarding rule that can be enacted easier as we are dealing with digital items. So if you want to compare it to what the status quo of justice system, this doesn't have to implement it as hard as bad as that, because you can just remove malice and evil entities that don't want to, let's say, follow certain rules and keep killing certain individual, for example. That is going to be very easy to be done. But third thing as well, even if it is not technological, let's say that give them the premise that probably it's magical, right? Like, let's not assuming that we are not going to be able to implement all this. One thing that can be ensured is that unlike reality, there will be no limitation of space, no limitation of resources, and no limitation limitation of geographical access. All this means that the people would rarely have to encounter people they don't want to, and they can create and share defined areas on the system based on what they want them to be. E.g., there is a specific area in San Junipero that is dedicated for all range of sexual kinks. There is also area that don't have to cater to this particular specific needs, and these are something that is very likely to be done, meaning there is no urgency in the side of affirmative. But even if there will be people that inevitably meet in the virtual life and they might have opposing view in real life, for example, I think that oppression are less likely to occur because one, they have different mindset now. Because people that enter this program are probably more self-centric to not try to intervene because they have a lot of different lists that they want to do in their own life rather than trying to intervene on others. But there is less incentive to act in aggression, which was previously fueled by either real or imagined threat to survive. Why? One, infinite resources. There is less incentive to be cruel as they don't have to compete to gain pleasure. But two, there is no social structure that compels them, like religion and also culture. In conclusion, that government ability to fulfill their responsibility are not limited in status quo in this particular context where this technology or like this system exists, which lessen the incentive to exclusify the technology. The second thing I want to talk about is the assessment on outcome, right? How will this influence real life dynamic? Number one, understanding the context of how life is full of suffering that everyone suffered from. And regardless of objective view, I think that people are going to assess this individually and subjectively prior to their own experience. They will most likely still feel that there are certain aspects that are unfair within this particular system. This will nurture several things. One, now versus later mentality. The current rate of competition on resources are bad, but it will be even worsened when majority think that there is a certain and absolute compensation that is guaranteed toward minority. There is less incentive for them to be, let's say, more hoarding, for instance. So they might not directly be as cruel and like, let's say, as malice, but it is possible that they're going to hoard more resources that are also essential to the life of minority in real life. The conclusion of this is that there is a worsened status quo mechanism for the life of minority, while the government would not remove, like, let's say, incentive and, let's say, program for minority, majority would less likely agree to the level of the vulnerability that minority have in order for them to deserve that, right? It reduces the effectivity of the current existing narrative that are progressive in order for us to be able to build the life that the minority need in real life and not only toward the afterlife as well. Which, based on all those reasons, I hope that it's clear to why that it is important for us to not restrict, more than proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition, for the speech. To respond, let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here, floor is yours.
Hi, 1 minute to the toilet. Just will be really quick. Wait.
Yeah, okay.
Hi. Okay, sorry for the time taken.
Hi, ready?
Wait. Audible and visible.
Yep, audible and visible.
Okay. Yeah, again before my speech. Thank you so much, IWGM for sorry, Debbie. Thank you so much, IWGM, for conducting these very fun competitions with all of the fun motions. I'm really happy to be here with you all. Also, shout out to my teammates, Taka and Debbie. Love you guys. POI, just do not go through chat. Just raise hand probably, so I can see if you're giving POI and not forget. Starting my, gender pronoun she, they, or just refer to me or DPM. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It's quite confusing when opposition try to propose to you that fairness is important, but that's why they want to provide over the rainbow for everyone, including people who doesn't have the same starting point as the marginalized community, for example. But this is why the principle that Raka brought to this debate is heavily important, because there is a significant difference and also capacity for state to cater to like every incentive that could be beneficial for minority. That's why these compensations in the afterlife can be an unlimited like compensations for the minority in itself. I will integrate this further on my arguments. 2 things I would like to explain. Number 1, how does this impact the way these people perceive life? But also, secondly, why the multi-level infinite under oppositions is going to be rather bad, but also I'm going to explain more on how then marginalized community perceive these in this life. So first of all, I would like to talk about how the status quo looks like for the marginalized community. First of all, generationally, they are off to always fight for something that might be basic for like those people who are more privileged. This is like what Raka told you. For example, they probably have different starting points when it comes to money and also like educations, for example. But secondly, we do agree that affirmative action still exists in both worlds, but notice that state cannot necessarily fulfill every marginalized group's needs all the time due to fund, for example, or like how the time taken is quite long, for example, for each policy to be ratified on, which even though it's essential for certain group, that's why Over the Rainbow could be like one of those compensation for this particular group. But thirdly, I also want to highlight why taking example of individuals like Beyonce on their side is like entirely different to like struggle within generations, even though it's the Beyonce. Because we agree that even though there is like range of struggle, what you have to notice that big figures, Beyonce and Taylor Swift, for example, they're an entirely different person with different experience because there are collective racism or like discriminations that happen even to themselves, although they're very famous, for example, but also like to their relative or to their ancestors, etc. That's why we agree that even though they are already gained certain degree of succeed, but they need to take more energy to achieve those in comparison to their majority counter points, for example. That's why they still deserve to go to Over the Rainbow, but if they do not want to, sure, it's an option under our side of the house. It's not a problem if they felt like, oh, it's not my morality to go to this particular Over the Rainbow, right? But like, secondly, why the multi-level infinite access that opposition tried to prove to you is going to be bad? Because number 1, on opposition, if state were to give like fairness to everyone, irrespective of like their historical background, it takes the state on opposition to generalize the like struggle or the amount of history struggle that is undergone by anyone else's majority and also marginalized community. That means you are going to further undermine the specific and unique struggle that marginalized community might undergo, but also the significant effort that they opt to take in comparison to their majority counterpart. But secondly, my first characterizations already told you that in this world, they already felt the cruelty of like how incentives still can also be like marginalized for them, either because there is like limitations and whatnot. Hence why under that side, it would most likely be unfair. But first of all, I don't think that metric fairness on their side of the house can only be measured once everyone get the access, for example. Because first of all, and in the end of the day, your unfairness as like a marginalized community in this world are also a result of like government incapacity. This is why it is justified for like government to provide this to certain minority, right? But also secondly, right, in comparison for like, for example, if there are people who are, oh, what if there are ally, for example, people who change their thoughts and whatnot, we think that sure, it's totally fine if they do not receive this particular exclusive access. Number one, because they already have different starting point, which means they do not necessarily take a lot of struggles and fight that this marginalized community needed. But also we concede since the very first speaker that there are still like another afterlife according to your beliefs or your cultures, for example. And the idea about that if you do good, you will still go to heaven or like beautiful afterlife does not necessarily disappear under our side of the house as well, right? But exactly why OverTheRainbow is distinctive from this particular afterlife, because in OverTheRainbow, everything is controlled, and hence why we only want to give this privilege towards like marginalized community, right? But thirdly, in real life dynamics, why this is going to be also better for affirmative action. Number one, notice that once you actually enact this particular policy, it takes certain degree of states to be able to recognize if certain groups does actually have the particular struggle, hence need more affirmative actions or need more attentions, right? For example. But secondly, this incentivize like also more attentions to help to help marginalized group, if not to directly fund them, but also to provide platform, for example, to be able to acknowledge how many marginalized group in their community, because like what Raka told you, they need like, for example, to collectively learn all of the data from this marginalized community, right? But thirdly, that means in the worst case, if this is just like, for example, queer washings policies coming from the states. Number one, we think that what would happen when you already able to enact these policies is that this course or like discussions is going to be happen much better under our side of the house, because people are going to constantly call you out on whether or not, for example, government or state put the exact people that deserve to go to OverTheRainbow, but also to think about on whether or not they treat the marginalized group properly, like they enact the most proper policy for them or not, right? Because once it becomes like one attention coming from the state, this is why discussions is going to be much more likely to happen under our side of the house. On their side, what most likely going to happen if people who are already privileged wants to go to like the OverTheRainbow, these discussions about like this unique group are going to be overshadowed because states are going to have to cater to a lot of groups at once to fulfill their needs. Proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister, for that very fine speech. Yeah, let's welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition. The floor is yours. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, POI unmute. I wouldn't be looking at the chat. Yeah, thank you so much for IWGM for having this competition. Thank you so much for Kajes and Kagres for adopting me. So yeah, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'd like to clarify the burden on government team is not to prove that minorities deserve compensation, because we agree, and that's probably the reason why you don't hear us engaging to the urgency, because we agree that they need that compensation, and it probably cannot be done in this kind of world right now because it's probably going to take too long. So that's not the burden. What is the burden on government is to justify why majority should be punished, because we agree that minority should be compensated, but punishing majority, aka restricting their rights to OverTheRainbow, is another question altogether that I don't think they have ever been able to really answer this. So I think it's quite confusing when opposition propose that fairness is important, and yet they don't want to give this to everyone. The only harm that we could hear from them is that, well, but then compensation becomes no longer spatial because now everyone can get into it and the access is not restricted to a specific group of people. I don't think not being spatial is a significant harm, because that's only a matter of perception, right? You just feel like, oh, everyone got it, so it's not spatial. But it doesn't mean that the benefit that you get from Over the Rainbow is going to be decreased, because you would still get infinite amount of opportunities to be happy, which is amazing for everyone that would want to take that chance and feel like their life isn't complete yet. So that's for clarification. One rebuttal real quick is when government state that um compensation therefore is needed, and just because compensation is needed, it means automatically you can punish majority. I don't really agree. Three response for this. First, historically marginalized group, they probably happen this probably happened in the past, aka this the fault of the ancestors of the majority that happened right now. So it's unclear to me why you can punish them. Why the sins have to be they still have to bear the sins of their previous ancestor. I think it's unfair. Second is that even if that they are still complicit, let's say, because, well, maybe you don't necessarily do it, but when you are born into this world, you automatically inherited whatever resources your ancestors have unfairly taken away from minority before. However, you cannot choose who you are born with. So yes, they're automatically inheriting all those privileges, but it doesn't mean that it's within their control, and therefore I don't think it's fair for you to take away their rights or punish them for something they cannot control. And third is that I don't think this is what minority want in the first place, because government keeps saying that this is for minority, right? This is for underprivileged groups. But I don't think this is what the actor that they are talking about is actually, their desire of, or what they want. Because what has been the narrative from minority is always that we want the same like what majority have. It has never been about we want majority to have less things in this world, but saying I want that too. I want that happiness too. I want that job promotion too, and I want that food too, because I need to feed my family as well. So it has never been about punishment. I don't think government has been able to answer that. So going to my extension, I'm going to tell you why everyone deserves to get into Over the Rainbow, which is that the thesis is that what everyone deserves is time. I think time is the one resources that no matter who you are, whether you are privileged or underprivileged, you cannot control this. You cannot buy this. You cannot create more. You cannot save time. You cannot deposit time. You cannot withdraw time. The number one common enemy of humankind is time. Everyone is running out of time. Everyone wishes to have more time in this world. Time, therefore, is the only variable in this universe that is the perfect equalizer. And this directly engages the government team because they want to create compensation. And the idea behind compensation is equality. You want to compensate because you wanted to make it equal. You want to compensate because in the past before something was taken away, so you need to compensate right now in the status quo. So the reason why time is the perfect equalizer is because no matter how different people are in terms of resources and opportunities, let's say you have privileged group, you have underprivileged group, time gives you infinite amount of chance to do retry in life, and it's what allows everyone to eventually reach the same level. So no matter how long it takes, time is the only thing that makes the impossible become possible. For example, in this world right now, in this timeline, it's close to impossible for poor people to be able to compete with privileged individuals due to multiple structural reasons that both things would probably agree, things like level of education, etc. But if both these poor and rich individuals are given equally infinite amount of time, there will be a point in that infinite stretch where they will be at the same maximum level of existence. It doesn't matter how long does time have to pass until that point is reached, but it will be reached. So the caveat is that this is not an abstract argument about time that I'm trying to say, but simply the idea of having forever within your grasp. And that's why you shouldn't restrict Over the Rainbow, because it's what finally allows people to slow down, simply knowing that they could get into it. It doesn't matter if they change their mind. It doesn't matter if maybe some people don't decide, like, you know what, 75 years in this world is enough. It doesn't matter. But that equal opportunity and knowing that you could have that if you choose to is what allows people to slow down, to stop looking ahead at the finish line, and instead look left and right to other people on their sides, because the race is finally over. It gives people the time to catch up. And this directly also is a reminder to my first speaker point about competition, how you're going to this restriction is going to affect behaviors done by the majority, because they feel like you are still competing in this real world, while the minority will have an infinite amount of chances to be able to do anything they want in life later. And that's why you have a tendency to hoard resources away. And this looks like, oh, because I only have 75 years to be able to be happy, they will do things like refusing affirmative actions, or maybe don't want to donate more because I mean I need to have this all for myself because I'm competing against time. So not only that, you turn the table around. This is the worst asymmetrical compensation of all times. You don't only give minority compensation equal to have what have been taken away from them, you give them infinitely more and take infinitely more from the majority, because it's an infinitely cost, because the majority cannot access infinite amount of resources, so the cost cannot even be measured. You need to realize this, how unfair this is in nature. So the conclusion is that this is a level of unfairness that is probably unprecedented before and potentially cause a level of suffering that would be unjustifiable. On our side, I think majorities and minorities would be able to slow down because they realize that the kind of competition, the kind of scarcity of time, resources they can finally be free of that race. And when they are free of that race, it's what allows them to slow down, and it's what prevent selfish behavior. At the very least, we reduce it significantly, and that's what we believe would be a better world for everyone to live in. Proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for the fine speech. To close the entire government bench, let's welcome the government whip. Floor is yours.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yep, both audible and visible.
Wait a minute. Hmm. Oke. Baru jam 5. Dipakai masker apa? Wait. Yay. Yeah. Yeah, before I start, yeah, I would just like to thank IWGM for the amazing competition. Really love it. All the motions and all the panels and everyone I met here is really amazing people. Also, thank you for Owl and Raka. All right. Please wait. Mm. All right. I'll start my speech. Oh yeah, POI just raise hand or chat box. Raise hand aja deh. Sorry. Okay, I'll start my speech. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I would like to question why suddenly the idea of people that has been historically oppressed throughout time having a chance to actually live the life that they could have lived these years if like your ancestors didn't like kill their ancestors or your ancestors didn't steal their land seems as a punishment for majority. I think it inherently reflects what majority thinks. Happiness for minority is a punishment for me, right? But even if that is too extreme, I would like to point out to you why actually this is not a punishment at all. Because simply having access towards a digital afterlife is not a benefit that should have been provided by the government and etc. Sorry, like from the very first start, it is not something that is given to you as like your birthright, right? Different than like systemic oppression, where you should have the right to live freely. You should have the right to like build economical money and like gain like and have children and be married. That is a right that has been taken away by history and time. That has been like so important and stuff like that. But I will continue to engage to that later. Think having a chance to redo all of this in afterlife, where you don't have to meet your oppressors and just live with like your group and like the other marginalized people who share probably the same struggles as you, is simply an advantage or even a compensation. You not receiving that compensation is not a punishment, it is just an unearned advantage, right? And like, so what does it matter suddenly just because this is not a punishment and an unearned advantage? I think we need to reconnect back again on some several ideas and contexts that have been provided. Like for first, the idea that very first time that the idea of afterlife, it doesn't exist in a vacuum now. It is not only your digital consciousness, but also like certain beliefs and also like certain things that you have built up in your life. It will build the idea of that afterlife. So if you, let's say you are a majority who is an ally of, if you are not a part of a marginalized group, but you live a good life and stuff like that, then you can still also achieve an afterlife that is suitable towards your ideals, right? So it's not punishment just because certain people have access towards this afterlife. But if they try to engage on the metric that, well, I feel like it should be fair because like it has an abundance of time and like people should be allowed to access this time and be allowed to access like that can happen when you enjoy this afterlife. I think I want to impose to you or contest to you that the idea again about how this should be made towards a compensation and an act of restorative justice rather than ensuring fairness. But even if you want to ensure the idea of fairness, I think you should question where does fairness stands. Because it's like just what Owl has mentioned before, if you suddenly announce that, okay, everyone, you know what, you can enjoy your afterlife later on, you can enjoy different suffers, yada yada, you don't have to connect with like your oppressors and stuff, it is not special and it is not fair. The opposition mentions that, well, it doesn't matter because like you still get to have the chance in life. But I will impose to you that it does actually matter. Imagine you are a part of those historically marginalized group. You spend your years fighting and trying to believe that there is a better chance in life. It's offered to you now that you can live that all in the afterlife. But you have the idea that later on, the people that that have oppressed you, their ancestors oppressed you, also have the same equal amount of chance to access that. How would you feel, honestly? Maybe it doesn't affect you in digital afterlife, but it affects how you enjoy that experience because you keep on thinking, oh, the people are also enjoying these things. So like, why does it actually matter that I have this good afterlife? Because I also enjoys the same thing. To some extent, it even discredits the struggle these minorities go through, right? Because they have gone through all of it, and this is a reward, a compensation that, okay, like, I'm sorry that we have put this all through you. You deserve this. But giving to everyone, is like, fuck you. You know what? Everyone deserves a good life. What makes you special from everything? But I think like we have to expand again. So even if they, I think like one more interaction to this is the idea that, you know what, like historically it happened in the past and it is the fault of your ancestors, so this is unfair. This is some even more insensitive thing. Just because the ancestors did it in the past, and let's say the people or like the grandchildren is now allies, it doesn't erase what it has done towards your ancestors, your grandmothers, your grandfathers, and stuff like that. Even if you want to say, okay, can I attack you, but there is no like physical proof. I mean, yeah, you are able to live and stuff like that. You just need more time. But the idea is that how I live right now, let's say like I am a Bataknese person, because of these Bataknese ideals and like why I have such a strong-headed mentality is because my grandparents wanted me to not be able to easily get broken down by people trying to perceive down on me. Why? Because that's what happened to them in the past. So I need to live a hard life in order to have a good life because that is the mentality. Even if the people who oppress you has died, the system still exists. The values are still upholded in the current society to the point that it affects you. But moreover, back again on the idea of time, the idea that generally everyone can live a good life, everyone can live a slow life and pay attention to others just if they have enough time. First of all, I think this even stresses again the idea of how the oppression was so bad because these people, let's say like everyone currently right now had the same amount of time to live, right? But for this marginalized, why weren't they not allowed the privilege to experience life as how second opposition has mentioned? I think because exactly the time was taken away from them. What does mean the time was taken away from them? It's of living a good life. They were supposed to be slaves. It's of living like the life that they are supposed to be living, slowing down. They are so expected to like work constantly because they are seen as second-grade citizens. Like, to contextualize this even more, the time that is expected to be having when you have a good time to live a life in such a slow and like in such a good pace that you are able to like focus on the struggles of those around you is because you took someone else's precious time. This time is not something that is just given randomly and it's an infinite resource to anyone, but to some extent, even in your life, you away the time of other people in order to achieve this preciousness that you think of like slowing down and seeing other good things, right? So if it's really the best thing that you should have like in terms of resources so that people can enjoy this. Still, it is unfair just to let everyone now have the same infinite amount of time just because on the basis that it will not affect the resources or how they think because we have proven to you how this kind of structural and oppression is so deep rooted in generational living to the point that it really wouldn't change anything. Lastly, I think more against on like brushing the topic of mechanism. I think the best idea that was like proposed is back again on the idea that why don't we just create infinite servers, because like now everyone can just choose what kind of servers that they want to interact with, right? But I think like technological abundance doesn't mean that you should immediately use it, right? Back again on the idea of how this should be an action to betterment the people of life, not a benefit or privilege that everyone should receive. And like back again, as I mentioned, this is not punishing the majority. It is basically an advantage that they could not access because of what has happened. But even if that advantage is not accessed, there are still like alternatives and like ideals that have been like pushed down also, because majorities also has the access of like imagine what a good afterlife looks like. That's why I want to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech, Government Whip. Let's welcome the opposition whip to close the entire debate. Last but not least, floor is yours. Here.
Okay.
Check. I will be, can that fan be? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I will be utilizing my teammates' device. Wait, let me open my Coloc app. Cool. Also, I'm not as level-headed as my teammates. I will try my best not to get too up in my feels, but there will be one triggering example in relation to lived experience of family of queer people. I will label when I will start and stop the example. So if it sounds like something that you do not feel like you have the capacity to listen to, I will mark it, yeah. Okay. Oh, wait. Let me also open chat because Boy is through chat. Boy. Chat. I will send through chat as well when the trigger warning ends. Okay. Oh. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We concede on the urgency that historically marginalized groups deserves better, deserves reparation, and deserves restorative justice. But the BOP of this debate is whether we have to exclude others to attain those. Weighing 1, whether restriction is justified and good by value. Weighing 2, will it lead to desirable outcome on the physical world and on the virtual world? Not only these two weighing, not only should be weighed to the perspective of the historically marginalized, but also to consider on a wider scope the outgroup that will be excluded. I'm proud to frame this debate. Now, entering my clashes, I think that eternal life beyond the pearly gate was only meant for those who believe in a spiritual afterlife. But with the existence of this technology, some people never experience worldly milestones, never achieve desires of the flesh, and they never even enjoy the privilege that is a peaceful, normal life. And I agree that such people have suffered, and thus they deserve OTR more than anyone. Now, this will be my recontextualization. This is the raging question. The first layer. Should suffering be generalized through identities instead of lived experience? Example like, is Kanye West, who is a cishet man and is rich, considered privileged or marginalized because he is a black man with severely untreated schizotypal personality disorder? Is a man who was raised by an evangelical suburban white family considered privileged or marginalized because he had chosen to sacrifice their attraction towards men and having to dissociate when procreating with his wife, for example? So this is a question on setup, right? Is anyone who has at least one marginalized identity within them considered part of the marginalized group? Or does any identity that is related to privilege automatically cancels out their marginalized status? Or is it that only those with a lot of intersectional vulnerabilities that would be considered suffering enough to go to OTR? This will be the start of my trigger warning. The conclusion of this first layer of characterization is the lack of principle justification on profiling people based on private, internal, and subjective matter, such as suffering. Just because suffering can be objective and uniquely shared by a collective group, the kind of people that you're punishing is a rich conservative majority ethnicity parent whose suffering is now invalid just because she is torn between loving her queer daughter unconditionally while believing wholeheartedly that they won't meet in Christian heaven. So if the motion passed, my mother cannot even meet me in Over the Rainbow. That will be the end of the trigger warning. TLDR, for people who didn't listen before, my DLO concluded that minority do not want basic rights and opportunity to be taken away from majority, but to expand it to be expanded to include minority as well. It's never about erasure and invalidation of other people, especially majority suffering. Just because you are not historically sharing your suffering with other people does not mean that it is invalid. Now, the second layer, should we measure suffering like an Olympic when it concerns identity? Because I agree that identities is highly correlated with systemic suffering and glass ceiling and lack of access to opportunities to certain groups. That is true. Historically, there are groups that require reparations. That is also true. And I understand that in the matter of world, of state management, of governance, prioritization matters because there is finite resources and it's a zero sum to prioritize one group of people over accommodating another, right? But that is not the case when it comes to the afterlife that is over the rainbow. That finiteness does not exist anymore. So the question of the urgency of why that prioritization matters, even from this house that is going to enact this exclusion, is something that can be justified or even necessary, or even does that urgency still exist? So that will be my first reframing and my first class, essentially, in regards to principle. But secondly, let's talk about the practicalities, right? I'm going to respond to affirmative main worries. One, they worry basically that we're going to transfer real world dynamic to the OTR. So like, for example, maybe there will be racism, there will be under prioritization of people who during their life were minorities, for example. My main question is that why can't, like, I don't know, government or whoever enact this application extend the protection that they have in real life towards minority once they reach the OTR, right? Because we need to agree on the setup that this service is provided by some sort of authoritative actor, and this authority cares and is concerned about historically marginalized groups. Therefore, the comparatives that we must make and must assume is a benevolent operator of the service that aims to provide moderation and protection towards users. So obviously, moderator will not allow serial rapists to serial rape, or racist guy who want to purge POC, for example, because other customer satisfaction and enjoyment matters basically. But what about the question of like racist Karen who do not do any crime and they're just insufferable? I think that we have set this up in my LO. You can avoid them. A, there are multiple servers. B, even if there's only one server like San Junipero, it's one area but really, really wide, you can just stay in one place and create an enclave. But 3, people naturally form enclaves with people of the same interests. So essentially, people with different interests most likely will not interact unless one of the person is so insufferable and actively seek that, in which they will get moderated, just like IRL, right? You can call a police on a Karen that is bothering you. But even if you have to be in one space, my DLO has talked about this. Even if you have to meet, there is no scarcity of resources and time. People fight due to scarcity of resources and time. That's why you feel threatened by a different group. It also means that as privileged majority in real world, you can slow down. You can be unafraid of missing chances and losing out on opportunities and be cutthroat IRL. In the world of the affirmative team, you will worsen majority sentiment and resistance towards things like affirmative action, because people's identity is intersectional, right? They always say that, but there are lower middle class white people too. So probably, most likely, they will be even more sentimental about that, because now you get even more special access in the afterlife, especially because majority are usually religious. That's also a thing. But lastly, if not in the real world, then change of behavior will also happen in the virtual over the rainbow world. Regardless, because second chances are usually utilized by people for self-centric means, for missed opportunities, for things that you didn't get to do IRL, for things that are too taboo and you cannot do. So you are less likely to focus on others and stripping away other people's right and be hateful, because now this is your world. You are the main character. You can be as narcissistic as you want. You can care about yourself. So the likelihood even for people to be that hateful and that aggressive is also questionable in the world of affirmative. We have explained to you not only the setup of why most likely most issues can be mitigated, but we also have explained why the behavioral change and behavioral and mindset of people will be different from status quo. But most importantly, we have provided you the justification or the lack of it in the world of affirmative to exclude majority. And that's why we beg to oppose.
Thank you so much, Opposition Whip, for that fine speech. Yeah. Moving on to the reply part of the debate, let's welcome the Opposition reply to take the floor.
Check. Am I audible?
Sorry, one more time.
Am I audible?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, let me drink first ya. Water, please. Water. Ini. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I hate to say this, but the metric that you can be sure about when it comes to what the winning point in this debate is exclusivity. Because the things with the case of government is that while that it sounds urgent, there is a several fatal mistake that they have contributed. Number one, all of the urgency that they have mentioned are never directly correlated to whether or not that it can be compensated and whether or not that it can be better felt or improved on with giving an exclusive access to this particular system. Because if they do say that there is some level of suffering, there is a lot of level of suffering, and to some certain extent, this level of suffering justify the act of exclusifying this. The only way for us to be able to justify this, if either that this is something that the minority want and need, but two, if whether or not that by exclusifying it, it will make the minority feel better in Over the Rainbow, which has been dismissed by two of the very amazing second and third speaker in opposition, which never being rebutted or never being rebuilt to whether this is something that exclusively needed and wanted by minority. The second thing when it comes to exclusivity as well is that whether or not that exclusifying the access of this particular system necessary to begin with for them to manifest the benefit that they want. Because the benefit that you could be able to obtain throughout the speeches from the affirmative is two. Number one, the benefit of practicality of being able to access it and live and get a second chance in life, which also contributely the same in our side of the house with all the system that has been established. If they are so worried that you are going to encounter people you don't want to, but two, and then we also the thing that is exclusive in their explanation is the level of discomfort. The thought that minority might not feel comfortable with the fact that the people and the majority that historically oppressed them are going to be given the same amount of rights as them. The way that we say this is that one, we think that this is a very this is a simplification and also antagonization in the way that minority think and perceive things, right? Because again, minority has never demanded all of these things. They have never feminism never asked men to not get their wages or to not get paternity leave. We fight alongside that. Or let's say people of color has never asked, trigger warning, for the white people to be lynched back. What they want is the same equal protection about their life so they could be able to live. All of this is an equal proof for you to be able to understand that minority never demanded more things. They want equal things, and that can be attributed with government providing the general universal access, and it can be catered with the existing and implementation of the system. What do they say in response to all of this? They say that the system might not be effective. It's actually very vague in the third speaker. I am not really sure in the way that how they are going to rebut this, but I think that when it comes to what effectivity of this, in comparison to what we have explained, we have given you more proof that there are more likelihood for the system to work, as that is also understandingly a fiat that we can claim on, because when we are talking about technology, arguably, of course, there would be administration that are going to maintain the server and observe the server. But on top of that, even if this is not technological, we have served you an idea that there is unlimited number of resources and space. That is an important aspect in regard to whether or not that you are going to be able to encounter that, but also an important aspect in the way that it will impact the personality and also psychological of the people that are living in that context, right? So if they are afraid that people are going to be as oppressive, we argue that they will not, because they already do not have the motivation to do so, because because of the absence of the motivation that exists in real life, which is the need to compete for resources. But on top of that, DLO has explained to why that particular need would also erodes over time because of the concept of time that are going to be different as well, that are going to be implemented. There is no responses to whether or not that this system are unlikely to be implemented or unlikely to manifest in this way. But on top of everything else, their most fatal mistake is this engagement toward how did it impact the real life dynamic. Because what they're so afraid of are about the way that minority live their life in status quo. But there is never any explanation to whether or not that the harms that we have established in regard to whether there would be more hoarding or like the hoarding, let's say incentive, or whether or not that there will be more egotistical nature of majority that feel like the compensation has been given to minority are not going to be there, right? Because it doesn't matter what the government do in real life. For as long as the majority of people feel like minority had enough, we feel like the harm should still be applied, which never been concluded by them. More than proud to oppose in this debate.
Thank you so much, opposition reply. To close the entire debate, let's welcome government reply. Here.
Check audible.
Hello, am I audible, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Karena tadi belum say thank you, I would like to say thank you to IWGM and also my teammate Kak Awe and Kak Debbie. Thank you udah membawa aku sampai sejauh ini. And also Kak Grace, Kak Gio, and also Kak Jess. And lastly, my novice team Power Pack. Good luck in grand final. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 clashes in this speech. Firstly, whether or not it is something that justified. Several observations. Firstly, they said, oh, it will be like better and also equal if everyone can be included because it will be like becoming more fairness and etc. I think this argument shown you that even the access to create a higher level of restorative justice exists, we still create unfairness in our life. Because at the end of the day, majority living an easier life and also they get the same happiness in the afterlife. Besides the fairness that they said, I think that there is no like complex benefit that they said because why then at the end of the day, fairness is something that really needed at the end of the day. B, they said that, oh, there is like Black people who might be rich and etc. Then like Beyonce and stuff, and why then we're weighing whether or not these people should be going to this place or not. I think this denied the fact that the process of achieving those standards, it's not that easy because there is a racist industry, for example. So even that harm that we need of the restorative justice still exists at the end of the debate. But see, they say that, oh, people like minority right now tend to be like changing their value to be more conservative and etc. But I refer to Kaaul because Earth right now is something that majority centered. They becoming conservative because of one trauma that probably happened to them. This is something that they learned. But second of all, they forced to following majority parameter of life that probably also they learned from the majority itself. I think this is something that makes what they want to do with this kind of people is something that unjustified at all. Because majority backlash exists in every policy making that supporting a minority, but at least the discourse will be accessed under the house. Why there is like a certain urgency, for example, we need to create a better life in afterlife, which means that earthly life, it's not something that better in the current status quo. And states at least give a certain benefit to this kind of people. The weighing then becomes, we're not going to generalize what majority needs and also minority needs in the very first stage. But welcome to my second clashes then. Which mechanism will be like better? I think like in terms of observation, firstly, they said that, oh, this is something that becoming like multi-server and etc. Several weighing, I think firstly, even though yes, we can separate it minority and majority, it creates no significant benefit at all. Because at the end of the day, the vulnerable actor elector in our side of the house still get the same access what they do under what they do at the end of the day. But second of all, your memory going to be transferred into a virtual life. Knowing your oppressor also get to heaven, it is something that probably will harm you in the very first place, right? But B, if they say that, oh, it makes more people equal, it makes people less extreme in the world, because towards society, when you see that minority have unlimited resources, you will be like more extreme and etc. If they say that there is this sentiment of majority, means that minority sentiment is something that also valid. But the weighing then becomes, this argument only exists in vacuum. We told you that the context exists of a voice of awareness like restorative justice, movement, media scrutiny, and etc. So I think this is something that cannot just happen on that way. But see, they say that minority do not want to be to punish majority, but they want to living the same life. But just because they said that doesn't want to be they want to be like living the same life like majority, doesn't mean that majority means have extra step to do a reparation to you. Why this is something that do not still justify the death of the house. But then they thinking about like, oh, majority, taking majority access and etc. I think it's afterlife is different in your life. But lastly, about affirmative action, I think that showing that we need to do a justice in afterlife, show you how bad current status quo is, that we cannot give them like, it is a momentum of calling out and etc. We're proud to host.
Yay! Okay, thank you very much everybody for that really good debate.